Don't trip, you know? I know things is hard right now. You looking for a job. You out there hustling. Money gonna come your way, just don't trip. Gotta keep your shoes tied.
Okay, this is part 10 of the Russell Poole theory into the murders of Tupac and Biggie. And so there's chaos at Death Row Records, and the investigation is supposed to go right back, and it's supposed to lead to Orlando Anderson. He's getting offered up to Las Vegas police, but they're not buying it. They don't think that Orlando Anderson had anything to do with the shooting. There were basically three different things that start all at once. You have the Tupac Shakur is alive, and so that narrative gets put out. You have the Orlando Anderson was the shooter. That narrative gets put out. And you also have the East Coast, West Coast narrative that gets put out. Now keep in mind, these are chaos merchants. This is a criminal defense attorney that has planned a murder. And he's planned a murder with LAPD cops, with Compton cops, and with Las Vegas cops. And so this murder, they're going to attack the evidence right away. They're going to attack it at the death certificate, which has flaws. They're going to attack it at the coroner's report, which has flaws. They're going to attack this in every way they can. And the greatest defense against a murder is the fact that the person is not dead. And so this is something that they're constantly pushing, these three narratives in the Tupac Shakur case. And you'll notice with the trolls that when they don't get away with one kind of a narrative, the trolls on comments, they start with another. And when I say trolls, I'm not talking about real people. I'm talking about fake accounts that get set up, and they have no history, and they just start leaving these crazy comments. And when they find one narrative gets constantly deleted, they immediately switch and go to another narrative. And they're constantly trying to sell the East Coast, West Coast, the fact that they're trying to sell the East Coast, West Coast. They're trying to sell the Orlando Anderson was the shooter narrative, or they're trying to sell the Tupac is alive narrative. And so there's this chaos now that's going on at Death Row Records. And you have Suge Knight, who is locked up. His probation has been violated. He's going to go to prison. He's sitting in jail in Los Angeles. And at the time, we were told that Suge Knight coordinated the hit on Biggie Smalls with cell phones. Now, we checked out whether or not that was possible. And in Los Angeles County Jail, back then at the time, with cell phone technology and what have you, not possible. It's not possible that Suge Knight was coordinating that hit from jail. Now, since then, I also interviewed somebody who was in jail at the time with Suge Knight, the night that Biggie was killed. And there is no way that Suge Knight could have possibly been involved in the murder of Biggie Smalls. He wasn't at least directly involved. Now, it's not that he didn't give the order previously. It's not that that he wasn't somehow involved in it. It just wasn't that he was on cell phones that night coordinating the hit from his jail cell. That we found very impossible to happen. And it's part of why Russell wanted to apologize to Suge Knight and try and get his cooperation in solving both of these murders. And that's why Russell was going to his meeting to meet with the sheriffs. Now, I've since talked to one of the witnesses who had gone to the feds and said that Suge Knight had tried to get him to kill Biggie Smalls previously. Now, it's possible that that happened, but by this time, I think Suge Knight's only thinking about himself. How's he going to get an appeal? Is he going to get an appeal? And what's he going to do with Death Row Records? Well, the smartest thing would have been to just completely shut down Death Row Records and just keep the royalties coming into his account, but that's not what happened. He lets Reggie Wright Jr. Run Death Row Records, and he does that after the murder of Biggie Smalls and after the murder of Officer Kevin Gaines. Now keep in mind that Officer Kevin Gaines was dating Sharitha, and there was a rift between him and Suge Knight. And Officer Kevin Gaines was becoming unraveled. He was involved in the Biggie Smalls killing, and the Biggie Smalls killing really is pretty simple and pretty easily documented, and the Wallace civil trials pretty much cover that with lots of paperwork. Amir Muhammad was the shooter. Here again, a shooter that they could cut loose if the shooter got caught. The ammo this time, though, was Gecko. Armor-piercing rounds were used because it was an experience modification from the previous. They didn't use a gangbanger shooter. They used a professional assassin in Amir Muhammad. And who was involved? It's the same group of people. It's Rafael Perez, Kevin Gaines, David Mack, Reggie Wright Jr., Reggie Wright Sr., and the hip-hop cop says that Compton police were hired for security for Biggie. So they were there at the Peterson Automotive Museum. And it was a similar military-grade operation, and there was a structure that they were coordinating it from, very similar, with the radios, the scanners, the whole thing. There's a gun that gets dropped right out of a car, right in front of the fire department. Guy gets out, fires a few rounds into the air, and then drives off. Well, the fire department's obviously going to call that in, and that happens minutes before the shooting. So all the good cops get pulled away. The corrupt cops are there to kill Biggie Smalls. And this is how the Biggie Smalls killing went down. And here again, this galvanizes the East Coast, West Coast, and then there's the Kevin Gaines killing. And the Bank of America security hears that it sounds like some kind of an assassination that's happening. They're told by their superiors not to say anything and to let it go because they didn't want to get involved in what looked like a hit sanctioned by LAPD. And years later, we have Frank Liga, who says he knew exactly who he was shooting when he pulled the trigger. And Russell Poole found that very, very disturbing. He said had he known that at the time, that the Gaines-Liga incident would never have been cleared. There's no way he would have cleared Liga if he knew that Liga knew who he was shooting when he shot. And so this does appear that it's somehow involved with Death Row Records. Now, it could be that when these two murders were offered up to Suge Knight, that's when he put Reggie Wright in charge. And that's when all of the chaos at Death Row Records stopped. Now, there's a lot of reasons why we believe all of this. There's a lot of evidence that's poured in. We have a lot more to discuss. Awful lot more to the Russell Poole theory. But this gives you kind of a thumbnail sketch of the Russell Poole theory in the murders of Tupac and Biggie. And there's more to talk about. There's the bank robbery with David Mack, but the same MO, scanners, radios, chase vehicles, to be able to escape as the Biggie Smalls killing. And there's the evidence that goes missing out of evidence lockers with Rafael Perez. There's the Gaines-Liga shooting that we need to go in depth on. But this concludes today's look into the Russell Poole theory of the murders of Tupac and Biggie.
I'm not gonna die until I change this. I got a baby girl in this world, so I ain't got no choice. Y'all either gonna take me out or ride with me, and I put that on everything.
Hard times hate us, yeah, but that's okay. I'm a hustler, and that won't change. Hustling.
Don't trip, you know? I know things is hard right now. You looking for a job, you out there hustling. Money gonna come your way, just don't trip.